Welcome to the Human Performance Podcast. Here we talk about everything to do with human performance and how leaders and organisations can get the best out of themselves and their people. I'm your host, Alex Young. Hey Joan, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Alex. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. And we were just commenting before we started recording that you're based in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm based in the UK where the weather is very, very different at the moment. It's absolutely freezing here. So hopefully you can send over some US, Arizona sunshine and warmth to anyone listening outside of Arizona today.
Well, I used to have an office in Stevenage and an office in Slough, and I used to bring something in my suitcase for you guys because I know it can get a bit dreary this time of year.
That's very kind. I think if you've experienced Stevenage and Slough in the UK, you know sort of what the weather is like over here. So that's great. Well, it's going to be fantastic having this conversation with you. Obviously, you've got an amazing background as an entrepreneur and helping entrepreneurs in a variety of different spaces. But rather than me telling everyone about you, it'd be great to hand over to you just to tell all of the listeners about your amazing journey and what you're doing.
Well, if you ask my husband, he probably wouldn't say it's so amazing, but it's been fun. Basically, where I've come from. So I spent the first 20 years with mom and dad. And then the second 20 years after I was out of college, I worked for a company called Avnet, which is the largest distributor of electronics and components in the world. And so during that 20-year run, I got to go all over the world. We had, by the time we were done, businesses in 63 countries. I learned what it was to scale a company. We were 750 million when I started there. And the team grew the company to over $20 billion by the time I left 20 years later. And so when we look at scaling, there's so much that an entrepreneur has to learn. So when I retired, which was in the first time, I'm a 3-time loser at retirement. But when I retired the first time in 2002, my goal was to take everything that I had learned and share that with entrepreneurs. And so I started a company called CorePurpose, which I still have to this day. And it was specifically focused on helping entrepreneurs. And then I learned a very rough lesson. There were a lot of entrepreneurs that wanted my help, but there were very few entrepreneurs that could afford to pay for that help. And so when I had the opportunity to become chairman of the Opportunity Through Entrepreneurship Foundation, or OTEF, in 2006, it fed that need to help entrepreneurs because OTEF had the funding to help the entrepreneurs, and I didn't have to worry about getting a paycheck. I could go and do that somewhere else. And so it allowed me to work with entrepreneurs and help them look at the questions of how do you find money? How do you scale a business? How do you pick the right talent? And how do you find the right investors? And so as we started to go through that process, it really started to click. And then in 2011, I had the opportunity to move from being a life science investor to being the head of the Life Science Industry Association here in Arizona. And now I have 276 little companies that I get to work with, and which is fabulous. And then on top of that, we still have the same problem, which is we're a flyover state. And we don't have someone like the Wellcome Trust. So how are we going to fund this early stage innovation? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit longer in the podcast. But that's my big project as we move things forward. So back to you.
No, it's absolutely amazing. And I mean, one of my first questions I'm really intrigued about is, with your experience of having worked in large organizations where they've been scaling, but also with lots and lots of entrepreneurs and now with lots of companies, what are some of the most common things do you think that early stage entrepreneurs struggle with in terms of their mindset or just kind of getting going if they've, say, got an idea, then, turning that into an actual business?
Timeline. That is their biggest challenge. It's very funny. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who has been the chairman of 3 unicorn companies in his career. And we were talking about the fact that it never happens on time or on budget. It always takes at least twice as long and at least twice as much money as the entrepreneur immediately envisions when they think they've got the next big thing. And so understanding that timeline, having advisors who can sanity check your plans and give you that little bit of realism. Because if you undershoot your timeline, if you don't give yourself enough time to do things right, then you're either going to run out of money or you're going to build a business that's not on a solid foundation. And both of those things are terminal to any good business idea.
It's really interesting. And obviously on this podcast, we talk about things like human performance and mindset and bettering ourselves, whether you're an employee at a company or whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. From the people that you've worked with, whether they are the founders and entrepreneurs or whether they're C-suite executives, are there any specific traits that the people who have, maybe gone on to build those unicorn companies or have just done phenomenally well in business have that you've sort of seen again and again, or is it variable, do you think?
I would say that the traits that I find in the most successful business builders is that they know what they're good at and they know what they're not good at. And they find people that have skill sets and talents that complement their weaknesses so that they build a balanced team that can get the job done. If you are a super entrepreneur who can do it all, you're probably not doing it all well. And so building that team and really finding some people that will challenge you, that will complement your skill sets and have talents you don't have or experience you don't have is critically important.
It's great advice. And I think, for me personally, as someone who left working as a trauma and orthopedic surgeon and then went on to found a business, when I had my previous businesses, which I ran around being a surgeon and I was doing literally everything myself, it took, me a significant amount of time to really kind of feel comfortable in handing over the reins and giving away some of my toys. But immediately when I was able to do that and I was confident in the people that we brought in who complemented my skill set or had much better insight and depth to the areas that we brought in for me to hand off things to, I was able to then focus down on the bits that I was good at. So I think that's an absolutely excellent point for anybody listening. And are there any kind of common problems that you see in terms of mindset for entrepreneurs that you often, if you're consulting with people or you're providing any coaching, that you have to sort of reiterate for these folks?
Absolutely. So, one of the key things is, and I find this more with younger people who go directly into entrepreneurship as opposed to people that may have come out of a corporate environment and then move into entrepreneurship, is that there's this misconception that when you're the CEO of your own company, you are the boss and you don't report to anybody. And that's not true. You report to your investors. You report to your board of directors. And by the way, as an investor, I'll tell you, I don't invest in companies that don't have boards of directors that are not able to fire the CEO. Because otherwise, there's no guardrail to keep that CEO safe and to ensure that they listen. And so when we get so focused on our big idea, on our mission, on our quest, we sometimes start to develop blinders and then we don't see things that are coming at us. And so, the leader of a company needs to remember that When you take other people's money to fund your company, you are responsible to them. When you develop a product or service that goes to customers, whether it's a B2B or a B2C, you are responsible to those people. And when you start adding people to your team, you're responsible for them and their families. So as you start to do this, you really need to make sure that you're building an infrastructure. I remember that one of the first companies I ever invested in was a company called Xilinx, which is today a very large company. They make programmable gate arrays, FPGAs. And Bernie Vondersmit was the founding CEO of Xilinx. And he used to have an organization chart, and I still have a copy of it, where it's an upside down pyramid, and it listed all of the people on top of him with him at the bottom. And he always had that on his desk, front and center, to remind him that, yeah, he was the one that was, on paper, the boss, but his responsibilities was for everybody in that pyramid feeding. And if entrepreneurs look at their businesses that way, they'll build better businesses.
100%. I mean, I think one of the things that we talk about quite a bit on this podcast is that your people are your most important asset in any business. And really, it's the people that you bring in through good hiring processes, good company culture, especially what we're seeing now with a lot of large companies and every type of company where on the back of the pandemic, increasingly companies are using remote ways of working to kind of engage and hire the best people, which is where scalable company culture and things like scalable onboarding are just so important for folks. I mean, with your background, obviously there's a significant proportion spent in things like life sciences and almost sort of like for good causes. I mean, what are your thoughts on, you mentioned vision and mission. What are your thoughts on sort of applying yourself to make the world a better place in whatever you're pursuing as an entrepreneur or in a business?
So I have a lot more gray hair than you do. And, as I look back, and I've had fabulous opportunities in my career. And I am truly grateful to all of the people and organizations who put their trust in me and gave me those opportunities. But at the end of the day, I would say that the last 10 years of my career have been the most rewarding. Being in a nonprofit structure where I don't have to answer to the street. And let me tell you, if you've never been on an analyst call, going to the dentist ranks up there ahead of analyst calls. Okay. They are going to probe everything. And so you really want to find something where you can look back over your career and say, my team and I accomplished this. Now, in some cases, and in mine right now, I get to work with entrepreneurs who are striving to literally change the world of health. We've got an entrepreneurial company, Oncomix Therapeutics. They identified a myxoma virus. It's a virus that kills bunny rabbits, but doesn't hurt people. So the human body doesn't recognize it. That makes it a fabulous host to carry immunotherapy to patients. And so for some of the cancers that we really don't have good answers for today, they're working on answers for that and getting that to the clinic. Then I look at Calviri. Calviri has found a way to develop a new kind of vaccine, and through that, a new kind of testing that could result in the eradication of cancer as we know it today. Can you imagine a world without cancer? So those are just two examples of the companies that I get to try and help. If they succeed, I had a little part of that. That's something to be really proud of as you look back.
No, Well, that's absolutely amazing. And I think with life science companies, and particularly ones that are going down that route of pharmacological or immunological sort of products, really, they can, take a significant period of time to go through research, get approval, get into market. For you, when you're working with those companies over what is potentially quite a long time frame from, especially if you come in quite early and see the idea, and then there's a significant period of time, how do you sort of see the energy around those companies? And I guess, your own energy as an investor and advisor, when you obviously sort of see them initially and there's a lot of excitement, and then they've got to go through significant hurdles to get to the end result. Does that, spur you on? Do you think it's a little bit more difficult to stay excited and energized with those types of companies over a longer period of time?
That's where you're, these are a bit buzzy, but, your vision, your mission, your core purpose as a company. And by the way, the company that I started in 2002 is called CorePurpose, and we actually have the trademark on the word. But the expectation, think of it like when you first meet the person that, sparks the room for you. And when you're dating and everything is beautiful and you're both excited and it's wonderful, right? But then as the relationship matures and maybe you get engaged, you get married, you have children, and in my case, grandchildren, it's not always going to be rosy and fun and exciting. Sometimes it's really hard work. Take that from somebody who's been married for almost 40 years. So when you look at your business, there's got to be that thing inside of it that even when things get really hard, and they will, things will happen that you don't expect. Problems that will come up that you were not prepared for. And it's hard. And, most entrepreneurs will tell you there is a period of time when, they wake up in the middle of the night trying to figure out if they're going to be able to make payroll or not. And those are things that it's that core purpose. It's your vision. It's your values. It's your mission that you and your team have to share that get you through those hard parts. Just like the love that two people in a relationship share helps get them through the rough parts. But if you don't have that shared purpose, you don't have that shared vision, those hard times are going to be doubly hard. So you really have to constantly build on your corporate culture, make sure that you are touching base with your team, make sure that your vision is their vision, your core values are their core values. A good friend of mine was the first people officer at Southwest Airlines, Ann Rhodes. And, Ann would say, if you hire people to the company values, you can teach them anything else, but you can't teach values, right? Your values are your values. So if you have someone who is not in sync with the company values, ultimately, you're probably not going to be happy with them, and they're not going to be happy with working with you. Does that help?
It's a great point. And I mean, it's something that in terms of the hiring processes that companies have, just bringing out some of those values through either, task-based interviewing or really probing into people's, backstories and experience to try and bring those out is just so important. I mean, one thing that really sort of interests me, just listening to you talk about sort of the people side of things, for you, when you've seen businesses scale and do very well, or through teaching and advising entrepreneurs and businesses, how do you think, or what do you think is the best way that people in any type of business can really learn and better themselves as they grow? Because it always strikes me that, especially if you're going from a small team of, say, sub 10 people to, growing your team to 1,000 or something like that in a short space of time. You need to educate your employees about the company culture. You need to onboard people around that. What are some of your takeaways from having worked with a number of companies around that side of things?
So the one thing that, starts with the CEO, you have to recognize that you are not going to be the smartest person in the room all the time. And you have to be constantly learning. That means, reading books from people who have been there and done that. Since I used Southwest as an example, if you haven't read Herb Kelleher's book, Nuts, like the peanuts on the airplane, read it. It is a really good journey book of how they got to where they got to. Read what's going on around you. That means you need to know what your customers are reading. You need to be on top of the news. You have to know how the culture is changing. So often we get so insularly focused on growing our company that we lose sight of what's around us. And when we lose sight of what's around us, we lose sight of the things that are impacting our employees, that are impacting our customers, that are impacting our culture. Me Too is a great example of that. That required that many people, especially people who were somewhat older and had operated in a certain way, that they had to change. Because otherwise it became not just a personal liability, it became a corporate liability. And so, understanding how the world around you is evolving, as well as how your company is evolving, is a responsibility. Because while your values are most likely not going to change, right? Those values are those intrinsic things, whether it's integrity, innovation, caring, social give back, whatever those values are going to stay inside your company. They're in your bones. They're in your DNA. But the way you execute around those values is shaped by the world around you. And so you have to be aware of everything that's going on. One of the benefits of being older is you don't sleep as much anymore. So, I'm usually up at 4:00 in the morning and, reading and absorbing and observing until about 6 a.m. when the East Coast wants me. And then I'll be talking to the East Coast people until about 8 o'clock when the West Coast people want me. And, and then it goes on like that. And then you talk to people all day and work with people on their projects all day. And then at 5 o'clock, you get back into the reading and responding and following up modes that you do, right? And when you are the CEO of an organization or the chairman of an organization, and I wear several different hats, then that's what your day looks like. And so making that commitment, understanding that that's what it's like. The other thing, because people have asked me, you've been married, I got married in 1985. So, and my husband and I, have been quote unquote together, since 1980. And people say, well, how do you, do all of the things that you've done, right? You had a family, you raised children, you've had these jobs, there was a time when I was traveling, going literally around the world every couple of weeks. And, how did you make that happen? And the answer is, number one, I picked a really good partner, which my partner, in this case, my husband, understood the type of person I was, understood what my values are and what was important to me. And then he was very supportive. I mean, he was so supportive because he had a big corporate job too, that when our boys were little, he literally quit his job and got his real estate license so he'd have more flexibility when our sons were little to do the t-ball and the hockey and the baseball and the karate and all of the things that they were into while mommy was off doing what mommy was doing. So, having a partner who understands you, understands your values, understands that, especially in the entrepreneurial space, I've seen so many families fall apart because the entrepreneur doesn't take into account that the risks and the commitment that they're making and taking also affects their family. And if families are not bought into this, if your family is not able to do what they need to do to survive and flourish while you're building, that destroys families. And when you destroy families, very often it impacts the company too. So, really taking those personal factors into account can make or break an entrepreneur and a company.
No, that's amazing advice, and I think you're so right. Having that partnership, I think partnership's such an important word, both in terms of your personal relationships, but equally, as we mentioned earlier, with your employees and with your investors, and having that sort of mutual respect and the ability to understand whoever you're working with or you have a relationship with is just incredibly important in life in general. Just changing tracks slightly. Obviously, my background is in healthcare and orthopedics, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I know that you are too. And with your multiple hats on as an advisor, investor, someone who's passionate about helping people in all walks of life through businesses and health tech and science. What are some of the big sort of innovations that you've seen in the health and life science space that you're either very excited about or you think are going to revolutionize things in the future?
So, when we look at technology, and it's interesting, people tend to take healthcare and tech and separate them. And in my career, I've been in tech and I've been, in the health sciences. And there is a convergence now of technology and health science in a way that we never imagined. So, for instance, finding, it used to be, right, there were 5 to 10 cancers. Now, depending on who you talk to and all of the variations and all of the genetic subtypes, there's over 200. So trying to find the medicine or the treatment or the vaccine that is going to make a difference in that. The potential variations are, as my friend Spiro Mousis at Systems Oncology says, the number of possible combinations is more than the stars in the universe. Think about that. The human brain cannot get their mind around that many combinations. And so what we're seeing now with the advent of computer learning, and ultimately when we get to AI, and I would argue that we're not quite there yet, but we're moving in that direction with machine learning, that's going to open a realm of possibilities to address so many different challenges to the human condition. And I think that will be very exciting. I think that as horrific and as tragic as the world's experience with COVID-19 has been, the amount of funding that has gone into developing new technologies around, for instance, mRNA, it is phenomenal. And billions and billions of dollars have gone into a technology that, quite frankly, and I have friends that have been working in an mRNA for decades, and everybody said, oh, yeah, that's a pipe dream. You'll never get enough money invested to get the data that you need to move it forward. Well, guess what? A global catastrophe caused that funding to pour into that area of research. And I think we're just now scratching the surface of where we will see health improvements come through mRNA. So that I think is very exciting. I think on the more tech side of the equation, we have learned that health IT, telemedicine, that is going to allow us to provide care to a much broader collection of people. It will also address something that you and I were talking about before we started recording, which is the challenge that we have a global shortage of doctors. We don't have enough doctors to take care of all the people in the United States, in the UK, or around the planet. And so we have to come up with new ways to make the doctors very valuable patient-to-doctor time focused on that patient-doctor interaction and not focused on things that can be better done either before a consult, during a virtual consult, etc. And it's interesting. We have a company here in Arizona called AdviNow Medical, who is combining that health IT experience with a machine learning AI type of interface that will allow more time spent in the doctor-patient conversation and less time with the doctor putting stuff into the computer while the patient sits there. And so I think that, from the patient experience all the way up through the treatments and cures that can be developed now that we couldn't envision 10 years ago. I think that, your generation, who is going to be, tasked with taking care of my generation, the opportunities to make life better for people through innovation are tremendous. The other thing that we really have to keep an eye on is that I'm the end of the baby boom generation. So the baby boom generation is 30% larger than Gen Y. Than Gen X. So there's this period of time where Generation X, my children, there's a lot less people paying into the social safety net, taking care of a lot more people who need the social safety net, the older people. And it's about a 30-year period where the world is going to have this problem. And then it self-corrects because Gen Y is bigger than the baby boom. And so we have to figure out how to use health innovation to take cost out of the system because we can't change those population numbers. And if we don't, things like cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, crippling diseases like arthritis, chronic diseases like Crohn's disease, those diseases will literally cripple the Western economies that provide a healthcare social safety net of one kind or another. And so health innovation, making life better through innovations in health, it is a global imperative. It's something that we have to figure out.
Yes, it's been very interesting just seeing what has happened in terms of adoption of technologies and funding actually on the back of the pandemic, which obviously has been just a terrible global event, which has detrimentally affected lots of people. But as you say, there's also been these other effects where we've seen lots and lots of funding put into things like mRNA research and almost like a mini industrial revolution where you've got some competition between these superpowers in pharma organizations who are really competing to get their vaccine, through approval processes and out into the public to tackle this enormous problem as quickly as possible, has sort of accelerated that research and clinical trials and got it out there. And similarly with things like you mentioned, like telemedicine, where previously some healthcare systems might have been a little bit slow to adopt, partially because doctors, nurses are so very, very busy that introducing any type of new technology that disturbs their normal working processes can put up barriers to just people using it, as well as some of the rules and regulations around that. And equally in sort of corporate setting as well, and health benefits there. Obviously, the United States has got a big insurer, corporate provider around healthcare benefits to employees and so forth. But, we're now seeing a lot more focus on things like mental health in the workplace, lots more remote employee perks, whether that is telehealth consultations with doctors. I think it's really, really exciting time in terms of health tech through that acceleration. As someone who's sort of an investor, how do you sort of see the funding side of that? I know at the top of the conversation, you mentioned things like the Wellcome Trust that we have here that funds life science researchers in the UK. What are some of the difficulties that some of these new technologies coming through face in terms of funding in the United States and Arizona in particular?
So in Arizona, we are what they call a flyover state. So if you look at life science funding in the United States, and there's more venture capital invested in life science in the U.S. than any place else in the world, right? But when you look at how those concentrations are geographically, they're highly centered in places like Massachusetts, where Boston is, and California, which, California is an economy in and of itself. It's about the size of France. So when you look at that disparity, you'll see that over 68% of the venture capital is going into those two states. And the rest of the country, right, gets what's left. Arizona is getting less than its fair share. And so one of my jobs is to look at why is that. And the answer is that the earliest stage funding, the funding when it's an idea and there's no data behind it yet, it's in development, it's at the highest level of risk. That's a time when the investors need to be closer to the company, being able to provide them with the support and guidance that they need to navigate that part of the development cycle, not of just of the product, but of the company itself. And so Arizona does not have enough of that very, very early risk capital. And so that is my quest for what I'm looking at as I'm 61 years old right now. I am blessed with really good genes. So my guess is I'll probably work for another 15 years or so. And as I look at it, solving that problem, it's all of my core values. It would allow me to help entrepreneurs who are trying to change the world. It would allow me to bring innovations to patients that may not otherwise see the light of day. And it would allow me to make my community better by creating great companies that create great jobs. So the challenge was I didn't have the resources to achieve my goal. So I called all my VC friends in and said, hey, look at what I'm doing. This was in 2014. And they looked around and they said, great, Joan, you've got some great companies. I'll invest in them and I'll take them back to California. I'm like, no, don't do that. And so I said, okay, if that doesn't work for me, give me another idea. They said, go talk to the family offices. So I started talking to my family office friends and got everybody to come in and look around. And we found a family office, the Stetson family office out of New York, that worked with us for 3 years to do a global best practices study of all the different ways people tried to solve this problem around the world. We looked at, A-Star in Singapore and U-Star in Utah and Biogenerator in St. Louis and the Wellcome Trust and National Health Service in the UK and, looked at all the models. And we took the best of every model, including one from the Wellcome Trust, which was that if you truly want to make an impact, you have to have a steady stream of funding that's sustainable. And so we are working to build a $200 million endowment that will grow with us over time, that will then put $10 million of very, very high risk capital investments into the earliest companies to de-risk them, to support them, to move them to the stage where they're attractive to angel investors and then ultimately to venture capital or the public markets. And by doing that, it'll be that catalyst that will move things forward. And that's, as my friend Francine Hardaway likes to say, that's the windmill I'm tilting at now.
That's amazing, and you know, what an amazing achievement to put that together as well, to help so many early stage companies. I mean, I think it's just so important to drive innovation on a global scale, and I think that's going to be absolutely amazing.
We're using technology. So just a side note. So my background's in economics and finance, and when all of my friends said, "Oh, you got to look at cyber currency," I was like, I don't think so. But I did go in later because I need to learn it because it's here to stay. But interestingly, there are a lot of people around the world that did invest early and are now sitting on big buckets of cyber currency, and they don't really have a way to use them. And one of the interesting things is that cyber is a great way to support philanthropy. So here in the United States, and I can't comment on tax laws in other countries, but here in the United States, we look at cyber currency as property. So it's like appreciated stock. And so if you bought your cyber at $100 a coin, and now it's worth $53,000 a coin, that's a tremendous amount of capital gains that you're going to be paying taxes on. However, if you donate your cyber currency via some of the platforms like the Giving Block in Washington, D.C., which is set up to do that, you can donate from your cyber account into a charity's cyber account and take the full value of that donation as a tax write-off in the United States. So for listeners that you have that are, looking at how to make a difference and have large large holdings in cyber currency, think about how you could use that to give back, whether it's to the Opportunity Through Entrepreneurship Foundation, which is what we're using to build the endowment I just talked about, the World Wildlife Foundation, the American Cancer Society. All of these, very, very high quality nonprofits are inside the Giving Block. And you can then use your cyber currency to do good instead of having it sit in your account and trying to figure out what you're going to do with it later.
That's an awesome tip. And I know that, lots of listeners who've got anything in kind of crypto or anything like that will be very, very interested to hear about those tax benefits. So that's a fantastic tip.
But keep in mind, that's just for the States. I cannot speak to other countries.
That's right. Yeah, I'm not even sure what it is myself off the top of my head for the UK and outside the US. We know so Tim and Adam Draper, who are big sort of investors in crypto in California, very, very well. So I'm sure they're all over at the US, and we've learned quite a lot from them, from speaking to them on their crypto investments. But it's really, really interesting. So yeah, for anyone listening, do look at sort of accounting around crypto in your own country to find out, what can be done. Because I would imagine some places do have sort of similar tax treaties, which would be really interesting. Jane, you've obviously done lots and lots, and you're on a continuous mission to sort of, change the world really with life sciences and health technology and all the amazing stuff you're doing. But be really interested just in the few minutes before we sort of close things down to understand who your heroes are, who have really sort of inspired you and keep you motivated on your journey.
So, I'm not going to give you like a famous person. I'm going to give you people that I've met along the way that have inspired me. First of all, my parents, because they created a solid foundation for me that, has helped to shape my values and my journey. And, they truly are my heroes. And then, more on the entrepreneurial side, I would say Francine Hardaway is someone that you have got to meet and talk with. So Francine she just turned 80 years old. She is a social media maven, was one of the earliest people on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and on all of those tools back at the inception. She is the founder of the Opportunity Through Entrepreneurship Foundation with two of her friends back in 2005. And for those of you that hang out on Clubhouse, she is one of the very early and extremely popular Clubhouse hosts and focuses on what's going on around the world and what are some of the key factors. Remember when I said what's shaping your environment around you locally and globally? She hosts one of the most popular global podcasts or global Clubhouse rooms on Clubhouse, just about that with people from all over the world. And she is a cyber currency influencer, and she's the one that kept nagging me that I had to learn it. So, and now I'm using what I learned. So that would be Mom and Dad, and then Francine Hardaway, who I hope at 80 years old, I'm still learning as many new things as she is.
Amazing. Well, those are both absolutely outstanding examples. Really, really, really great. So Joan, just as we wrap things up, if anyone does want to get in touch with you or find out a little bit more about what you're currently doing at the moment, where can they go online to access that information?
So probably the easiest thing is go to azbio.org. That's AZ like Arizona, bio.org. To see some of the amazing things happening in the life sciences. And if you want to see my windmill, if you want to see that model that we are now developing to fund early stage innovation in Arizona forever, go to azadvances.org and you'll find me there.
Amazing. Well, Joan, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I'm going to leave you to get on with the rest of your day and continue doing all the amazing work you're doing. But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And hopefully now that all the flights are opening back up to the US, I won't be flying over Arizona, but I'll be visiting hopefully very, very soon. If nothing else, than for the warm weather over there at the moment compared to the UK. So I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. I
will tell you, Alex, that Arizona Bioscience Week is the week of September 25th. 2022, and you have an invitation.
Amazing. I will absolutely take you up on that. I've never actually been to Arizona. I'd love to go to Phoenix, and I'm hoping that now things are, fingers crossed, returning to normal, that I'll be back out in the United States through 2022. So looking very much forward to it.
Come see us when you fly across the pond. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jane.